Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our session, How Your Brand Can Be Perceived as Cool, with our special guest, Caleb Warren, Associate Professor of Marketing at the Eller College of Management at the University of Arizona. My name is Sanya. I'm a part of the higher education team here at Ivy Exec, and I will be helping to moderate today's session. But before we begin, I have a few brief housekeeping items for our audience. First, all attendees are in listen-only mode. However, we do encourage you to engage in the session by asking questions, which you can do using the question box in your GoToWebinar control panel. Please make sure to use this feature for all the questions you may have for the presenter, while we invite you to use the in-chat feature for sharing any thoughts you may have with the rest of the audience. We will also be having a formal Q&A session, so please feel free to send in your questions throughout the session. And additionally, we are recording today's session, so you can look forward to receiving a copy of the recording via email in the coming days. Caleb, and before I go ahead and present you, can you let me know if you can hear me well now?
Yep, it's clear.
Oh, good. Okay. Yes. And now it is my pleasure to introduce you to our presenter today. Caleb Warren is an associate professor of marketing in the Eller College of Management at the University of Arizona. He thinks about what makes things funny, what makes things cool, and what helps people reach their goals. He also writes about these ideas in academic journals, including the Journal of Consumer Research, Journal of Marketing, Journal of Consumer Psychology, Psychological Science, and the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology. He teaches consumer behavior, digital marketing, and writing. He earned his PhD from the University of Colorado, Boulder in 2010. And with that, I would like to pass the floor to you, Caleb.
All right, thank you so much. So I'm going to be talking about research I've been working on for about 15 years now. It started when I was a graduate student. I was in a program in marketing, specifically in consumer behavior. And the main question in consumer behavior is, why do people buy stuff? And it struck me that a lot of people, at least the people I knew, bought a lot of the things they bought because they thought they were cool. Yet no one was really studying this or even had a good idea for what cool meant. So this led to my line of research. And what I wanted to look at, I think this is an important topic because a lot of people appear to buy a lot of things because they think they're cool. Apple, Converse, Pabst, Harley Davidson, and Instagram are just a few examples of brands that have succeeded, at least in part, because consumers think they're cool. Along these lines, a report in one of my favorite publications says that consumers spend $14 trillion annually on trying to look cool. Now, you may question the source, but the idea and the sentiment rings true. And there's even more credible evidence from a neuroeconomics lab out in California. A couple of researchers at Caltech put people into a brain scanner, and then they showed them pictures of cool products. And merely seeing other cool products was enough to activate the PFC, the medial prefrontal cortex, and the striatum, parts in the brain that are associated with reward. And this is the same pattern of activation you see when someone gets a boost in social status. So merely being around cool products is enough to make people feel better about themselves. So the cool, though, isn't an easy thing to study. And there are some people out there, there's a lot of consulting agencies that will try to tell you that, well, only certain people can understand coolness and only they can reveal what is cool. And this is good for their business model because it seems like you need to hire them if you want to find out what's cool. But I don't buy this for a second. If coolness is a real societal phenomenon, then we should be able to study it. And a number of researchers and academics and journalists have written about coolness, but they haven't really agreed on what makes something cool, much less what the word cool even means. Some people have defined it as a personality trait, others as a lifestyle, an aesthetic, a set of dialects, a form of asceticism, a performance, a coping mechanism, an emotional style, a rebellious attitude, a body of knowledge, cultural capital, a type of social status, or a set of shared meanings. So not a lot of agreement. But there is one thing that pretty much everyone does agree on about coolness, and that is, why won't this advance? Here we are. That is that coolness is in the eye of the beholder. To paraphrase journalist John Leland, if a tree falls in the forest and no one notices its fundamental dopeness, it's not cool. What this means is that if you want to understand coolness, you need to know what influences what consumers think is cool. So rather than it depending on how an academic defines what cool means, we need to look at how consumers, if not define cool, at least what influences their perception that something is cool. And so this has been one of my primary research focuses for the last 15 years, is what influences consumers' perceptions that a product, brand, or person is cool or uncool. And the way I test this in most of my studies is I'll give them something. I'll give participants a person, a product, a brand, a behavior, and I'll ask them, to what extent do you think this is cool or uncool? And then I try to figure out what's influencing those judgments, those ratings. So I'm not the first person to write or research this topic. And some of the early work, one of the more popular articles published by Malcolm Gladwell back in the 1990s, talks about how people become cool by association. And Gladwell wasn't wrong. So if you take a product like Ray-Ban sunglasses, the way Ray-Bans become cool is because they became cool in the 50s and 60s when cool people like Marilyn Monroe, JFK, Bob Dylan start wearing them. So cool can transfer from cool people to the products, but then later on, as less cool people started wearing Ray-Bans, their coolness can wane, and the brand takes on the lack of coolness from the people who are wearing them. So coolness, meaning transfer, basically, the transfer of cool from one cultural object, a person, to a product, explains some of how products and brands become cool. It explains quite a bit, but it's not a great theory of coolness because it doesn't explain what makes cool people cool to begin with. So this led to my first research question. If given that many brands, many products become cool because they're associated with cool people, then the question is, well, what is it that makes people cool? So that's the first question I'm going to talk about today. And their early work on this suggested that people become cool largely by having traits and characteristics, attributes, values that make them seem good. People use the word cool as a way to say I like something or something's desirable. Oh, that's cool often means I like it. Studies by a psychologist, Ilan Dar-Nimrod, and his colleagues found that when they asked people, what are the traits that you associate with cool people, they largely said things like, oh, they're nice, they're smart, they're capable, they're attractive, basically things that are positive. Research in technological products and brands has found similar things. Cool is closely related to being good. But if cool was just another word for good, then we wouldn't need to study it. There's centuries of research now on what influences a judgment that something's good, or attitudes, impression formation, if we're talking about people. But most recognize, or at least intuit, that cool isn't the same as good. It comes with some extra baggage. So then the question that I've been trying to answer is not just what makes people cool, but how is what makes people cool different than what makes them seem good? And the way I've tried to answer this question is I've run a number of studies now in at least 8 different countries. And in these studies, we ask people, participants, so we send out a survey to like 200 to 1,000 people. And then we ask them to think of someone they know personally, who they think is cool. Or we ask some other people to name someone they think is not cool. And then we can see the difference between how they describe a cool person versus how they describe a not cool person. But then we have two more groups. So we ask a third group of people, tell us someone who you think is good, and we ask them to describe that person. And a fourth group, someone who you think is describe someone they think is not good. And so then we can see, what are the traits or characteristics that explain the difference between cool and not cool people, and which of these are different or distinct from those that explain the difference between good and not good people. So let me give you the precise instructions. In the cool condition, we ask, please think of someone you know, a non-famous person who you like and who you consider to be really cool. Who you nominate isn't important as long as you personally like this person and he or she is cool but not famous. And then in the not cool condition, it was the same thing, but we said who you like but you do not consider to be cool. And for good, same idea, but instead of cool, we said a person who you like and you consider to be a really good person. And in the not good condition, nominate someone a non-famous person who you like, but you do not consider to be a good person. So we wanted to control for as much as we could, which is why we asked for someone who's not famous, and also why we asked for someone who they personally like, to try to control for that as much as possible. And then we administered this study in, after participants thought of a person, and we had them write down either the first name or a pseudonym for this person, we asked them to rate this person on 15 measures. So the big 5 personality traits. So they indicated how open is this person, how conscientious, how extroverted, how agreeable, how calm. And we also asked they had them rate this person on 10 different values. To what extent is this person powerful? Are they warm, traditional, capable, hedonistic, conforming, autonomous, benevolent, adventurous, and secure?
Sorry, Caleb. Oh, sorry if I can interrupt just for a second
Yes.
there. We have a question from one of our attendees who would like to know if you gave these surveys to the same group of people. So, did all survey groups get cool versus not and good versus not?
The studies were done between subjects. So what that means is some people nominated a cool person and different people nominated a not cool person. And different people nominated a good person. And then a fourth group of people nominated a not good person.
Got it. Thank you. Just wanted to, okay, thank you very much for the question. Yep.
Yes, and I have run studies like this, not with the good and not good, but I've run studies where I've asked for cool versus not cool within participants, within subjects. So that means I asked the same participant to nominate in this case, it was a brand, a cool brand and a not cool brand. And what I found is that usually you see similar effects. Sometimes they're bigger. They tend to be bigger if you ask the same person to describe a cool and a not cool person. Thank you for the question. So this is an example of the measures for, in this case, the security value. All the attributes, personality traits, and values had multiple items measuring them. So to the extent that people said it's important for this person to live in secure surroundings, this person avoids anything that might endanger his or her safety, then their score on security would be higher. We ran this experiment in 8 countries, got almost a little over 2,700 respondents, and we tried to cover each continent and got countries that varied on a number of cultural dimensions. So some of these countries are more individualistic, some are more collectivistic, some are tighter cultures, some are looser, some have higher uncertainty avoidance than others. So we started off thinking like we were going to see these big differences, and what makes someone cool in Spain is going to be very different than what makes them cool in South Korea, and that's going to be different than what makes them cool in Mexico. But that's not actually what we found. What we found were remarkably consistent results across the 8 countries. And what I want you to do is to try to predict what we found. So I have I'm going to ask you about 6 of the traits that we measured. And so this is the first poll. There are going to be 6 polls, and they're all very similar questions. So what I want to know is, do you think people who are autonomous are, and then the options are, they're cool, which means autonomy is cool, but it doesn't make people good, or it is both cool and good, but it's more cool than it is good. The third option is it's equally cool and good. The fourth option is more good than cool. The fifth option is autonomy is good, but it's not seen as cool.
Yeah, let's see what the audience says. So the poll is now launched. We'll give you a couple of seconds to respond. Okay, I think we have our winner answer here.
Oh, it just switched.
Yeah. Okay, this is interesting. Okay, we're closing the poll. Thank you, everyone.
All right.
So
although a minority of you were right, but the largest percentage of you were right, as we'll show you in a minute. So more cool than good. And now let's do the next trait. How about benevolent? Is benevolent cool but not good, more cool than good, equally cool and good, more good than cool, or good but not cool? So someone who's benevolent.
okay, we can see that the majority of our audience thinks the same.
This one we have a clear winner.
Yeah. There we go.
And your intuition is correct, and even better this time. We got a majority of people with what the data ended up showing. So let's look at the next one. People who are calm. Is calm cool but not good, more cool than good, equally cool and good, more good than cool, or good but not cool?
Oh, I think we'll have a clear answer for this one as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Here are the results.
Right. This one you were not as accurate on, so I'll save a little bit of suspense to show the results, because right now I'll say it's not equally cool and good, but you have to wait about 1 minute to find out which way it went. And then the next trait is capable. So it's being capable, cool but not good, more cool than good, equally cool and good, more good than cool, or good but not cool. All right. So
Closing.
yeah, there's some split here, and the minority of you, but the largest minority are correct. This one was equally cool and good, and I have either one or two more. Extroverted. So as being extroverted, does that make someone cool but not good, more cool than good, equally cool and good, more good than cool, good but not cool?
A clear winner over here.
Yes,
Yeah.
but
is it
not
the right answer?
Not what the data showed on this one. So I'll give some suspense on that too. And then I might have one more. Yeah, being open. People who are open, are they cool but not good, more cool than good, equally cool and good, more good than cool, or good but not cool? All right, this one's pretty evenly split. Oh, we're seeing not a majority, but a clear winner emerging, though. I think that's good.
Hopefully that's the correct answer.
Equally cool and good. No, you missed on that one too. So, but that's why it's important to conduct research, because our intuitions are often can lead us astray. And your intuitions weren't bad; like they were pretty close, even when they were off. But I was surprised by some of these results too. So here are the results, and let me explain how to interpret this. The blue dot is the difference between cool people and not cool people on the trait. So you're seeing the top line is the trait extroverted. The blue dot's at almost a 2, about a 1.5 to a 2. Oh yeah, 1.54, it's on the right. So, oh, that's the interaction. Sorry, that's a different thing. That's the difference. The thing on the right is the difference between the blue dot and the red dot. But what the blue dot says is people saw cool people as being about 1.5 points higher on the extroversion scale than not cool people. And what the red dot says, and in this case, the red dot for extroverted is on the left, is that in our sample, and this surprised me, people rated extroverted people as being less good than not extroverted people. It was the only time where we got a negative result on one of these traits. And the bar part is the estimated variance both across countries and across participants within country. So that means we're pretty confident, 95%, if our sampling's okay, that the range is somewhere in there. So we know that being cool or being extroverted is associated with coolness, but it's actually associated with being less good in these 8 countries we saw for the people we participated. And we recruited them all online, so it's limited to people who go online and answer these types of surveys. So extroverted, you can see, is cool but not good, as are being hedonistic and powerful. And then we see 2 traits in the surveys. Autonomy, which you intuited correctly, is both cool and good. So that's because both the blue dot and the red dot are to the right of the 0 line, but the blue dot is higher than the red dot. So that means autonomy is more cool than it is good. Open is another trait where I think you mispredicted this one. People weren't sure whether they thought maybe it was equally cool and good. Some people got it right. Some people thought being open was more good than cool. But in our samples we saw across countries, people saw being open. They rated other people who are open as being more cool than good. Capable was the only attribute that we studied where it was perceived to be equally cool and good. So directionally, cool was a little bit higher, but this varied across sample. And as a result, in the range, we're not sure. It's within the margin of error, the difference. So from what we can tell, being capable is both cool and good in equal measures. So being calm is another one I asked you about, and I think you intuited this one incorrectly, and you are not alone on this. There's actually a lot of people in coolness research who say the way people become cool is by not showing emotion, which is kind of like being calm, but that's not at all what we find. People, or I guess being calm, I mean, it is a little what we find. Being calm is cool, but it's even more so good. So it makes you good first, then cool. Benevolent, you intuited correctly. It's both good and it's cool, but it's a lot more good than cool. And then I don't think I asked about any of these traits that are good but not cool. Being secure, being traditional, being conforming. So let me see. Are there any questions that people have on these results or how to interpret this graph?
There's one question that Robert has, and he would like to know if you can point out when results are statistically significant or not.
So that's the bars will tell that. Anytime there's non-overlapping bars, that means, so if the bar is on one side of the zero, it doesn't cross the zero. So look at extroverted. That red bar is all to the left of the zero line. So that means it's significantly less than zero, which means being cool, being people who are good were rated as significantly less extroverted than people who are not good. Now, if we go down one to hedonistic, you see how this bar crosses the zero. So that means being hedonistic was not directionally, people who were hedonistic were seen as less good than people who were not, but it was not statistically significant. This was not significantly different than zero. So that's how to see, and that's how to interpret the effects of cool and good. And then for the difference, if you want to see the significance, you can look at the confidence intervals that I have on the right. And if those don't include zero, it means that the distance between the red dot and the blue dot is significant. And it was in every case except for capable.
Yeah, got it. Thank you, Caleb. No more questions at this point.
Okay. So this next slide is a lot, but I just want to show you what this slide shows is similar results, but it's for each country in the data set and the point at which each country falls. And this is a little bit of information overload, but what I'm hoping it illustrates is that we saw the same pattern for pretty much every country. And the one trait where we saw meaningful and significant differences in ratings of coolness across country was conforming. If you go way down to the bottom, you can see there's a really wide range on that blue line and the gray line too, between the extent to which, but mostly the blue line, the extent to which different countries saw conforming as being cool. So that would be like the yellow, India, the purple, South Korea, and not cool, like the green, Spain, the light blue, South Africa. So that was the one trait where we did see reliable differences across cultures, and they make sense. So we split the cultures or the countries, the participants, into those who came from relatively individualistic countries. And in our sample, the countries that were individualistic also had several other characteristics. They tended to be looser cultures. This means that people have more tolerance for those who don't follow the norm. And they tend to also have lower power distance. So there's less sort of perceived legitimacy to those in high power compared to the fewer people believe in less status differences, in theory at least, if not in practice. So in these more individualistic countries, United States, Australia, South Africa, and Spain, being cool or conforming was associated with being not cool. So conforming was not cool. The blue bar there is significantly lower than the gray bar. But this flipped in more collectivistic countries. So in South Korea, Chile, Mexico, and India, being conforming was seen as more cool than not conforming. And when we look at what's going on with goodness, in all countries, people see conforming as being good relative to not conforming. But whether that's cool, also cool or not cool depends on the culture. But this was really the only reliable cultural difference that we observed. So a lot more stability in what makes people cool across countries than there is variance, and more than we expected. And this data fits with some of the earlier research I did, which looked at, basically hypothesized that the way people and also brands and products become cool is by being autonomous, but in a way that seems appropriate. So you need to sort of break the rules, but in a way that others don't see as a problem. And to give an example, if you were to go to a conventional office job dressed in a normal suit, that would seem normal. It wouldn't show a lot of autonomy, and it probably wouldn't make you cool or uncool. On the other hand, if you break the rules a little bit and dress like this guy in the middle here, that might make you seem cool. You're breaking the rules, but in a way that seems appropriate, not harmful, not too crazy. But if you were to dress like this gentleman on the far right at the office, that would not seem cool. It would probably seem ridiculous. It's the difference between sort of breaking the rule in a way that seems legitimate or helpful or good, and in a way that doesn't seem helpful or legitimate or good, hence appropriate. And what I found, one of my favorite studies I've conducted, I worked with a couple of indie bands who at the time were based in Asheville, North Carolina, and they let me do an interview with the band, and they let me make up their answers to one of the questions, which is why do you write the songs you write? And so I had one of the bands say, well, our goal is to match the sound to mainstream taste. This would be the low autonomy condition. And another band, and I switched which band was saying which, said we write songs that feel right to us. So this would be the appropriate autonomy condition. They didn't follow mainstream taste, but they also weren't off the wall. And then the inappropriate condition was we couldn't care less what others think of us or our music. And then I had people rate how cool the brands were, and also how many downloads. I gave them a chance to download music from each band, and the band that showed appropriate autonomy was perceived as more cool, and the participants in the study downloaded more songs from this band. And I ran this 10 years ago when people still downloaded music rather than streaming everything. So slight difference there. Okay, so to wrap up this part of the discussion, what I found is that across cultures, cool people are social. So they're extroverted, and but they're autonomous, meaning they go against the norm. They're open to difference. And they can be leading the change. Yet they do this in a way that brings other people along, and that doesn't seem too crazy because there is that high overlap between being cool and being good, or being cool and being desirable. So this Jack Daniels ad I thought illustrated this idea well. So in the ad they say, Mr. Jack never followed the crowd, but they were always welcome to stop by. Autonomous yet appropriate. So I'm actually, given the time, I'm going to skip over this next project and skip to the one about brands. But I'll just briefly, because I'm going to be flying through these slides, what I was looking at in this next project is coolness different than humor? How is being cool different than being funny? Given that some of the theories about being humorous are pretty similar to the ones about being cool. And so I don't have time for all of this. I'll get right to sort of the punchline here. And we have brain data to back this up. But this led to what I call crazy, funny, cool theory. And this is a theory about how people react to when they perceive something. And in this case, I was looking at product designs, but it really could be, a product, a brand, a behavior, a person, any stimulus. Does the stimulus seem normal? And if the answer is yes, then most of the time we ignore these stimuli. If we've seen this before, then we're exposed to thousands, if not millions, of messages every day. We just ignore most of it. So if you want to be noticed, you need to do something that's not normal. And then the next question, so something's incongruent with what we see as the norms. The next question we ask is, does this make sense? Does it seem appropriate? Does this offer a better alternative to the norm? And if the answer is yes, now we're in the range of coolness. And so what I found in this research with products is people are more likely to pay attention to them. They're more likely to desire the products. And it's more likely to inspire change, meaning other brands will try to copy the products. Or if you see a person or a behavior that you see as not following the norm, but in a way that seems appropriate, we're more likely to follow it. And then on the not making sense side, when there's what I call a violation, something threatens your sense of how things should be, that can either just be bad, or if we don't think it's a big deal, that's where humor comes from. And that's for a very different talk and set of research. But being funny can capture attention, but it's a lot less likely to desire change. People, for the most part, don't like funny products, unless we're talking about a comedy show or a movie. and products are all funny is also less likely to inspire change than cool. And crazy and bad, you definitely want to stay out of that box, as anyone who's been canceled can attest. Okay, so I do want to talk a little bit about what makes brands cool, because that was, I think, the way this this presentation was marketed to you. And I have done a bit of research on this specific question. So, one way brands become cool is just by association with cool people. And so managing the the image that your personnel, your employees send, your consumers, spokespeople, all of this goes a long way to explaining which brands are cool and which are not. But there's a lot of other traits that we found are characteristic of cool brands, and this research started with we ran a lot of qualitative research, so focus groups, depth interviews, essay type studies in a number of different places. So in Portugal, in the UK, in the US, there was another European country, but I'm not remembering it right now because one of my co-authors did this research. But our our question was, what characteristics distinguish cool brands from uncool brands? And what we found from these this research was there were sort of 10 traits or attributes that consistently came out, both in the qualitative research, and then we were able to confirm later through types of experiments like the ones I ran with the people earlier. And so we saw that cool brands tend to be original and authentic, and also a little rebellious, and they're associated with a subculture. And then sort of those are the more autonomous traits. And then we have a couple of traits that are more related to just being positive. So people think their brand's extraordinary, good looking, that's the aesthetic piece, energetic, so exciting, in other words, high status. And then cool brands are also, they become iconic and popular. And in some way, when we saw this, we're like, wait, that doesn't make any sense. How can a cool brand be both subcultural and popular? And I'll try to explain how that happens in just a couple of minutes. But from this research, we developed a scale that we published in the Journal of Marketing, and that we think this can help brand managers or academic researchers do an audit of sort of, is your brand cool? Is it uncool? On what dimensions is it doing well in terms of coolness, and on where is it lacking? And so here are the example of, these are the measures in our scale. We have a couple of items for each of these dimensions. And then we wanted to use this scale and the subdimensions to try to answer the question, or speak to the question at least, if not answer it. How does cool change over time? Because I think answering this question will explain how cool brands can be both subcultural and popular, but it might not happen at the same time. And the example I like to go to here, because I'm a music fan, I'm sure there are plenty of examples from fashion, and I'll even give you some later, but I don't know fashion as well, so I tend to describe this in terms of music, is that cool begins typically in some outsider subculture, with a brand, in this case a band, Green Day being my example, that is very much flouting the norm. They're playing music louder and faster, but also in a way that seems appropriate. In this case, like, their music was really catchy. You could sing along to it. And at first, this brand was popular with just a really small number of people, the East Bay punk scene. But as they become cool to that small group, larger audiences start to notice. So I call this first part niche cool, when the brand is cool to a small audience, but largely unknown outside of that. But then the mainstream sees what's going on, and they see this band. In this case, they hear the band and like, oh yeah, they're different than what else is going on. They're not gangster rap or grunge or pop. So it seems autonomous but appropriate, and then a larger group starts following it, and Green Day ends up selling 10 million records and selling out stadiums. But then as they do that, they become the new normal. There are more bands that sound like them. The radio sounds like them. They're top 40. They're selling out stadiums. They become the new normal, which makes them uncool at first to their initial subcultural followers, but then even later to the mainstream, who might still like Green Day. So Green Day can still sell out stadiums, but they're not as cool as they once were. Now they're a market leader, which is where you often want to be as a brand, even though they might not be as cool as they were back when they were a tiny punk band in Berkeley or Oakland. But they have a much larger audience now. So what we found in this study is, in one of our studies, we went to a Reddit group, the Urban Streetwear Reddit followers, and we asked them to nominate one of 3 types of fashion brands. So we asked some to tell us a brand that you think is uncool, others a brand that you think is niche cool. So cool to streetwear enthusiasts, but not to the mainstream. And then a third type of brand was cool to the mainstream, but not to, cool to everyone, was basically cool to the general population. And so you can see the type of brands they mentioned. Like Gap was an example of uncool. I had never heard of any of the niche cool brands before. I've since seen them around a little. And the mass cool brands I did know, Supreme and Nike. And what we found is that the traits, so first off, the first thing we replicated our earlier studies, in that for both niche cool and mass cool brands, they rated higher on all 10 of these traits than the uncool brands. But there was an interesting difference between the niche cool brands and the mass cool brands. The niche cool brands scored higher on these traits related to autonomy. They were more original, they were more authentic, more rebellious, and more subcultural. Whereas the mass cool brands rated higher on these traits that they're popular, they're iconic, related to being a strong, broad cultural symbol. And it's not like brands have being niche cool has a different benefits than being mass cool. So the niche cool brands were loved more by the streetwear enthusiasts. They felt a stronger connection to these brands, and they were willing to pay more. Yet the mass cool brands attracted a larger price premium. And this is because it wasn't just streetwear enthusiasts who wear Nike. Everybody wears Nike. People talk about the mass cool brands more. And of course, they're more familiar and they get a lot more exposure in culture. So this led to our theory of how coolness changes over time. And we were looking at this with brands more so than people, because I think some of this comes from the meaning transfer of when at first, nobody knows about a brand that's uncool, but as it becomes adopted by a niche subculture, who then, along with the brand managers or just accident, happen to make the brand seem autonomous, rebellious, authentic, subcultural, then this can make the brand's niche cool to that niche. But then, hopefully for the brand, if not for the initial subculture, that brand gets adopted by the masses and becomes mass cool, where it becomes more popular, more iconic, and this is when the brand can really start to reap in the rewards, becoming a market leader, or generating more word of mouth, a higher price. And then eventually what can happen is the brand can lose its cool if it becomes too popular, a market leader. And first it's going to lose its cool to the niche audience. Those hardcore punks were the first to abandon Green Day for selling out, but eventually even the mass audience might no longer see the brand as cool. They might just see it as good, which isn't a bad thing to be if you're a brand. So I want to wrap up with a couple of conclusions here. If you want your brand to be cool, it helps to associate with cool people. And to find cool people, they're social, yet autonomous and open to change. And they tend to be the ones leading these changes. So the specific personality traits we saw linked to coolness were being extroverted, adventurous, autonomous, powerful, hedonistic, and open. Cool products are unconventional in a way that makes sense, so kind of similar to the cool people. And cool brands are autonomous in an appropriate way. So you're hopefully seeing a similar idea, although what those characteristics of appropriate autonomy and brands are a little bit different than people. Being original, authentic, rebellious, subcultural, exciting, aesthetically pleasing, extraordinary, high status, and then eventually iconic and popular, at least for the mass cool brands. So cool brands diverge from the norm, but they don't go too far. They calibrate their autonomy level to their target market, and they know which norms to break and which to follow. So to sort of wrap this up, what I've tried to do with this research is to really identify, demystify coolness. What is it that makes people, products, and brands cool? And Steve Jobs is in many ways the epitome of this, because I think, at least to me, he was a cool person, but he was not a good person. At least after seeing movies and reading a little bit about him. But he very much encapsulates this idea. The ones who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do. So cool is different, but in a way that moves society beyond. It gets it unstuck from its conventions at the moment and offers a better path moving forward. So brands like Harley Davidson offer an alternative lifestyle for people who are disillusioned with suburban middle-class life. Pabst gave American beer drinkers an alternative to mass market beer brands, who like Budweiser and Coors. And Apple changed the way that we think about computers, phones, and the entire music industry. So these brands became cool by offering a different vision for how things could be. Whether you're a marketing manager, a runway model, a high school outcast, or a marketing professor, coolness, I think, shouldn't be your goal, but it can be a reward if you figure out how to change the world, the market, the lives of the people around you for the better. So thank you, and I'd be happy to take any questions now. Oh, wait, there's one more. Before questions, I want to just give a pitch for the University of Arizona, where I work, my employer, and we have a number of different graduate programs in business where there'll be professors like me and many other who are more skilled and talented. We offer online, in person, in Phoenix, in Tucson, and so I hope you'll check out this if you're interested.
Yeah, thank you, Caleb. We do have quite a few questions that came in during your presentation, and first let's start with this one. So are you familiar with the PBS Frontline episode on the making of Cool? That came a few years ago.
No, it sounds like I need to see it.
Yeah, so there's one suggestion. Yeah, I'll have to see it too. Thank you so much for your question. And which factors would you say predict whether a niche cool brand can eventually become mass cool brand?
So I think there are two ways a brand can be niche cool. One is largely through association with people. So at Green Day, for example, their music itself wasn't that different than what the mainstream liked. It was very catchy. It had a similar chord structure. And the niche came largely from the audience it was associated with, the people who listened to them. And those brands have a much more likely chance of crossing over and becoming mass cool because the product is already going to appeal to mainstream tastes. It's sort of the outsider perception that made it cool at first. So like you see things like Levi's, Apple's always been at least it's been user friendly in the last decade or two. I think you can make an argument it was less so earlier when it wasn't compatible with a lot of softwares. But these brands could become mass cool because the products weren't what made it seem so different or autonomous. The attributes appealed to mainstream taste. On the other hand, brands that are autonomous or different because of something about the product itself. So if we're talking bands, a band like Minor Threat or the Dead Boys. So these are punk bands that played louder, more discordant. They were like screamier, and the production was lower quality. And this also appealed to a niche audience, but they never crossed over to become mass cool, mostly because mainstream ears didn't like the sound. And so I think if you are a product that has the taste might appeal to the mainstream, that's one where it's more likely to cross over and become mass cool. But it's still, anytime you try to explain what makes things popular, there's a ton of random variance in it. So there's no formula. But I think by having these 10 characteristics that I outline in the presentation, that can help and make it more likely.
Yes, thanks, Caleb. We have one of our attendees who says that she has a service for people who live alone without a lot of social support, and she asks for your opinion on how can you make a situation negatively perceived to be perceived as cool? Can we make such a situation cool?
I think I'd want to know, like, what is the end goal? Because cool, I mean, cool is, what cool can do is it can jumpstart sort of an outsider idea, an outsider product. I think what cool isn't very good at doing is, if it's something that's already known or established, it's not very good at turning it around, because it's really hard for those things to become cool. I mean, maybe they can be cool by being unfashionable. And also, cool isn't the same as good. And so if you're talking about, I don't know, someone who's, and I don't know, I need to know more about the situation, but if you're trying to like turn around a bad situation because someone is like lonely or in a bad family situation, cool is probably not the best goal. Probably go for good. Just try to fix the problem, whether or not it's with a conventional solution. So the unconventional solution might be cooler, but it might not be more effective.
Got it. Yeah, in this situation, the end goal is to provide social support.
I think if the end goal is to provide social support, I'm not sure being cool will be a helpful means to doing that.
Got it. Thank you. Hopefully this answers your question, Annette. One of our attendees also asked, how do we develop personal brands? So where would you say we should start?
Figure out what you're good at and how it makes you different than others. So that's one thing. And the other is, there's this illusion of effortlessness, or that you're not trying too hard. And that's a tricky thing, because a lot of times the way to do that is to try extra hard so that it appears that what you're doing to be different, or to be specialized in your area of expertise, is not something that you've labored tirelessly. Well, I mean, if it's something you can sort of show passion for it, but what you don't want to show is like, I'm doing this because I want a job, or I'm doing this because I want to be cool. So like that would be another thing. Make it seem like you're pursuing your interest out of passion rather than for extrinsic reasons, extrinsic motivations. And then look for, what are you strong at? What differentiates you from others in a way that seems good?
Yeah, that's a great advice. Thanks so much, Caleb. And would you say that brands should try to be cool? And would you say that sometimes brands try too hard to be cool?
I think it really depends on the life cycle of the brand and the size. So cool can be a very effective way for brands to go from unknown to popular. But once a brand is popular, I don't think it's helpful to be cool, because being cool to some people means being uncool to others, and you have a chance for a larger market share if you're just good to everybody. So I mean, there's some brands that are able to manage both. Like Apple, I can't believe, has stayed as cool with as many people as it has for as long as it has. Here in the most valuable countries in the world, but even sort of portrayed itself as being an alternative to Mac or PC, or more mainstream options, even though it's the most mainstream option out there. So it's able to maintain an illusion of autonomy or difference while being the mainstream product. And Apple would be a classic mass cool brand, but that's a pretty good place to be.
Yeah, it really is. And would you say there's any difference in how cool brands interact with their customers in comparison to less cool brands or the good ones?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I think that's a good empirical question to find out. The
Mm-hmm.
closest study I know to answer this looked at a difference between how consumers respond to exciting brands versus sincere brands. And exciting brands tend to be cooler than sincere brands. Sincere brands tend to be more good. And what this found is consumers are more likely to forgive the exciting brands after a mess up. In large part because it's, when a sincere brand screws up, it's a harder hit to that brand personality. So I'm referring to a study by Adam Brazel, Susan Fournier, and Jennifer Ocker that's now probably close to 20 years old, 15 years old. But that's the closest thing I've seen to, how cool brand, and that's not even how cool brands give different service than good brands, but how consumers might respond differently
Mm-hmm.
after a service screw up. So I think it's a really good question, and hopefully, if I do this again in 10 years, I'll have an answer for you.
Yes, yes. It may be a good question for your next research. And what would you say can be, some pain points that we would need to solve in order to create our cool brand?
So again, I think you probably shouldn't be striving to be cool directly. You should be striving for something else, and that could lead to being cool. Strive to sort of change. Look at how things are. What doesn't make sense? How does our industry usually do things? What can we change that isn't going to make things worse? And I think you want to be looking for, not looking directly for being cool, but looking for the things, the behaviors, the actions, or the sub goals that might make your brand cool, might make you cool as a person. So rather than trying to be cool, look for how can I maybe be more creative, or how can I find the rules that just aren't fair, or that don't make sense, or that marginalize some group of people or harm some people, and selectively rebel against those. That's sort of, I think, the way to think about it.
Mm-hmm.
Don't be thinking about how can we be cool, but how can we be different, or how can we change things in a way that won't make things worse.
Yes, wonderful. And here we have another interesting question. So why do some brands use cultural features or identities to be cool? What would you say?
I would ask for an example.
So, if you can give us an example of what you
Cultural
were thinking.
features and identities are
Yeah.
kind of abstract. I think all brands do that, whether they're cool or not. They're cultural
Yeah, some more
symbols.
than others. Yeah, but in the meantime, okay, so Asian Black features or identities, that is what our attendee was
The
thinking
idea
of.
is the brand tries to portray itself as Asian or Black to be cool. This is beyond what I've studied, and I don't feel like I know enough about it to answer the question. I'm sorry.
Yeah, thank you. No worries. And we have just enough time to address one last question that I think is good for us to close the Q&A session with. Could you share a couple of more examples, maybe, of the cool brands that you admire?
All right. I think Bob Dylan. I know he's a musician, but also a brand. He's someone who has consistently gone against the grain. Like in the early '60s, he was doing rebellious folk songs, and then when culture came along and everyone was into folk, he switched to rock and roll, and it pissed off the original folk people. But then rock and roll in the '60s became a huge thing and helped lead a cultural revolution. And when that was at its peak, he went and switched to country music. and brought about a change there. And then he, after that, went to religious music in the late 80s. He was never going to be pigeonholed into sort of here's what you are or here's what you should be. And then, as he became an icon for the counterculture in the, I think it was the 2000s, he started doing Victoria's Secret advertisements. So he was always just sort of pushing culture, following his own vision, and then it ended up following him. And for another type of brand, I mean, Apple's the easy go-to as a brand that from the beginning was positioning itself as an outsider, at first against IBM and then later against Microsoft. And so those are I think the two most prototypical cool band and then cool brand that come to my mind first anyway.
Thanks for sharing, and thank you. We're going to close our Q&A session with this question as we are right on time. And thank you for this insightful and cool presentation, Caleb. I enjoyed it very much, and I'm sure our audience did too. In case you have any final thoughts to share with our audience before we close the webinar, please do.
I just want to thank my collaborators. This research depends on a number of people, and especially those listed here. So I want to make sure that they get due credit as much as possible. Thank you.
Thank you so much again, Caleb. We appreciate really the time and attention you have put into making this presentation, and it was a great pleasure having you with us today. And to our audience, thank you so much for joining us for the webinar and for engaging in the session. We really have seen some great questions and thoughts that you shared with us today. We hope you all stay safe and well, and we really hope to see you on our future webinars. Thank you so much, everyone. We hope you have a great rest of your week. Goodbye.